Now isn't that nice? Already booted into my operating system and it's been less than 50 seconds.
That's right, I have officially made the switch to Linux. I have been saying that I've been wanting to do this for years. So what held me back? Well, simple. I didn't have enough hard drives. Now, full disclosure before we get into this, I know a lot of Linux people can be very annoying trying to push Linux on people and be like, ew, how dare you use Windows? And, well, I will be trashing on Windows in this video, and I will be making fun of Windows, and I will be praising Linux. I do want to make it very clear that I would never shame someone for the operating system they use. Every operating system has flaws. I stuck with Windows longer than a lot of people, and I definitely get why one would still use Windows to this day. Do not worry, this video is not going to be preachy, it's not going to be elitist, because truthfully, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, and that's part of the fun with this video. I just want to document my experience using Linux for the first time. So to say this is my first time using Linux technically isn't true, because back in 2021, when I was in high school, an IRL friend of mine lent me their Ubuntu SSD, and just let me mess around with it for a little bit. In fact, we actually found out that our school computers didn't have any restrictions involving booting from an external drive, so this ended up being a way for us to get around websites being blocked, which is kind of funny in hindsight. There's a fucking ancient video on my channel of me literally just booting into a school computer and using Ubuntu on it. Yeah, this is a real thing that I did on a school computer. Now, because of this experience, I actually knew something very important going in. Most Steam games would work. Geometry Dash would work. And that's all I needed to know, really. Beyond that point, though, I'd also just like to mention that a lot of you watching have probably actually used Linux without knowing it. Linux isn't just computer operating systems. Linux is very broad in what it covers. Have you ever used a Steam Deck? Well, you used Linux. Have you ever used an Oculus Quest to go into VR? Well, you used Linux. Have you ever used an Android smartphone? Android is technically Linux. Using a Linux desktop operating system, which is what most people think of when they think of Linux, it's a bit more of an investment, especially if you're abandoning Windows. And for that, I'm going to give one of my 2 pieces of advice to anyone who is considering switching to Linux. Do research before you switch. A ton of it. Any piece of software, anything you do on Windows, just do a couple Google searches and see if it's not only possible on Linux, but on the Linux distribution you are specifically considering switching to. For example, say you're a content creator and you make videos, right? There are a decent chunk of editing softwares that have a chance to not work on Linux. I can't guarantee for sure if these don't work. They might actually work with a couple workarounds, but as far as I know, Sony Vegas and Adobe Premiere do not work on Linux, as far as I know. But the thing is, if you do enough research, not only could you find that out ahead of time, but you could also just adapt by switching to a different editing software ahead of time. For example, I used to use Sony Vegas. Long ago, I switched to Kdenlive knowing that at some point I would switch to Linux, and Kdenlive works on Linux. I'm actually going to give an extra piece of advice for anyone watching this video, just to kind of clear the air, because I want to make sure that I make this very clear. I am new to Linux, alright? So do not treat this video like a guide. I'll not be showing how to install Linux, albeit it's not really that hard with the distribution I went with. All you really do is you go to the Manjaro website, you download Manjaro, and you just flash a USB with the installer, boot into it, install it to a drive, and you're done. Like, it's really not that bad. It's got, like, a GUI to help you through and everything, so it's not bad, but still, like, just in case there's some weird hurdles and stuff you have to go through, which, as I get into later in this video, there were, do not treat this video as, like, a step-by-step guide, or even a guide at all, because there are actual guides out there that can help you, and again, it all comes back to my first piece of advice: do your own research. The thing that I've learned switching to Linux, and something that I definitely want to make very clear, is that Linux is not hard to use. Linux is very easy to use, but just because it's easy to use doesn't mean it's not complicated to use. Linux is easy, but complicated, and you might have to spend a solid 30 minutes fixing a problem that would take 5 minutes to fix on Windows because A, it's just harder to do Google searches since not as many people use Linux, and B, some of the solutions are just really obscure. I'll be showing you examples of this later in the video because they have a lot to do with just my experience on Linux. But with all that out of the way, let me take you through my journey switching to Linux. So as I said in the intro, my journey switching to Linux starts before I switch to Linux, and that's through the planning stage. Initially, I was going to go with Linux Mint, however, I kind of started to do some research and realized that a lot of the higher end, and by higher end I just mean perceived to be complicated Linux distributions, really are not that complicated. So I decided to go all in and go with something more advanced than Mint. I ended up deciding to go with Manjaro Linux. And the reason I decided on Manjaro, for one simple reason, is it aims to be a user-friendly version of Arch Linux. Oh, fuck, someone's calling me in the middle of recording. Hold on. Hello? Oh. Oh no. Alright, well, thanks for letting me know. Alright, thank you. Bye. Alright, well, I've just been informed that I'm not straight. When it comes to planning ahead, the best advice I can realistically give is to just make it so that everything you use is in some way open source. Kdenlive is open source. I use a program called Shutter Encoder. That's open source. There are some programs that are closed source that will work fine on Linux, like Discord works fine on Linux, which I know is something a lot of people care about. But again, all coming back to that first piece of advice that I always am going to preach about when it comes to discussing Linux: do your research. If you're not sure whether or not a program's gonna work on Linux, Google it. Hell, even if you think you are sure, just Google it anyway, just to be safe. A simple, does Discord work on Linux, can do wonders. Another thing you're gonna have to do if you decide to switch to Linux is you're gonna have to assess if there even are alternatives for all of the things you use. And trust me, for some people there are not. Also, going hand in hand with this, there might be some games that don't work on Linux. This is rare, but there's a game I actually play quite a bit that doesn't work on Linux: Call of Duty. And on top of that, you might have some programs that don't work on Linux, like I use Apple Music to sync music from my computer to my iPhone, because I like to listen to music on my iPhone. It's kind of weird how in the modern day, your phone is also your iPod now. You know, back in the day, you'd have two separate devices for that, but whatever. My iPhone is basically my music player for when I'm in the car or whatever, so yeah, I like to sync up music from my computer to my phone. These are kind of things that you can only really do on Windows. That doesn't mean you can't use Linux, it just means you might have to go and do what is my next biggest piece of advice. You might have to consider dual booting. What this means is your computer might have to have two drives plugged in, one with Windows installed, another with Linux installed. Depending on the size of the drive, you might not even need two. You could probably partition your drive and have half of it contain Windows and the other half contain Linux, though from my personal experience, I would honestly just advise having two drives. That being said, at this point, you should heavily just consider your options, and again, the golden rule, everything it's all gonna come back to: do your research. Just look into whether or not you want to just switch straight to Linux or you want to dual boot. You have to consider everything, really, because even if you think this is going to be super easy, and it most likely is, but even if you think this is going to be super easy, even if you're going with something super user-friendly and basic like Linux Mint, you have to consider your options because you are making a very major switch. I describe moving operating systems, even if it's not to Linux, even if you're moving from, like, Mac to Windows, or Windows to Mac, or if you're moving from Linux to Windows, I consider moving operating systems to be the equivalent of moving into a new house in a new neighborhood. you know, there's just things you gotta consider, right? But enough about prerequisite advice for now, let's get directly into how my experience went. So step 1 was to order the drive that I would install Linux onto, and I ended up going with this SSD. Now, to a lot of people, you might not even know what the hell this is. This doesn't look like a hard drive, but this is actually a solid-state drive. This plugs in through an NVMe slot on your motherboard. That's really the only difference. I had an open NVMe slot on my PC that wasn't being used, and in my humble opinion, NVMe drives are the best drives you could possibly install an operating system due to the insane speed. So yeah, this is what I went with. That being said, Linux is faster than Windows in a lot of ways, so even if you're installing Linux to a hard drive, you should be fine. I'm just obviously trying to get the best of the best here. So, I went onto Amazon, I ordered the SSD, and I waited. Should only take a week to arrive, that's not bad. A week passes by, and it still hasn't shown up. Huh, that's odd, let me check Amazon. It's been delayed 2 days. Alright, well, they're offering to refund it if it's late, but I don't really want to refund it. I need this drive, so I guess I'll just wait it out. And in the meantime, while I wait it out, let's do a little bit more research. Like I said, golden rule. So I start talking to another friend of mine who also happens to be a Linux user and has been using Linux way longer than me. This is the same friend, by the way, who gave me the SSD back in high school. Yeah, I ended up just talking to them, generally just getting some Linux advice from them, and they informed me that some Linux distributions work fine with Secure Boot, others do not. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's get into a brief random section of the video where I randomly shit on Windows. So Windows 11 infamously decided to make the garbage decision to force Secure Boot and TPM to be enabled. What are Secure Boot and TPM? Honestly, I don't fully understand it myself. Like I said, I'm an idiot when it comes to some of these things. But from what I gather, it has something to do with preventing computer viruses from infecting the computer's kernel, I guess. Something about making the computer safer and less prone to getting viruses that I guess can stay after Windows reinstalls. I don't fully understand it. I do know that Secure Boot and TPM are legitimately good and you should consider using them. The problem with forcing it onto people is that not everyone's computer supports it. You know what I mean? And imagine like an enterprise of computers that's been going strong since like the 2000s, and they've, rather than buying new computers, just been upgrading to the new version of Windows every time it comes out, right? Maybe they started with Windows 7, they upgraded to Windows 10, and now they're forced to upgrade to Windows 11, except because they started with Windows 7, all their computers don't support it. That's over 100 computers, and now instead of being able to upgrade, they're forced to just buy new computers. It sucks. It's a dumb decision that Windows made. Knowing this, and knowing that Windows 11 forced Secure Boot onto people when it really shouldn't have, I started to wonder, you know, because obviously I was running Windows 11, I knew that I had it enabled. I started to wonder, is Manjaro one of these operating systems that doesn't play nice with Secure Boot? Turns out, unfortunately, it was. Now, by this point, I was already pretty dead set on the fact that Manjaro was what I wanted to go with, and so I started looking at both sides. I started off researching to see if there's a way to just sort of make Manjaro work with Secure Boot anyway, and there wasn't. So then, I turned to the other side of the spectrum. I Google searched to see if it's possible to use Windows 11 without Secure Boot and TPM, and it is. In fact, I found a Reddit post that basically says that Windows 11 doesn't require Secure Boot and TPM to be enabled, it just requires that your motherboard supports it. This is somehow dumber to me because this means even though you don't need it, they still force you to get it. It's if I can give an analogy here, imagine you go to a restaurant, right? And you decide you're going to order a hamburger. And the guy behind the register says, alright, you can order this hamburger, but you have to get mustard. You don't have to put the mustard on it, but you are required to buy mustard. Like, what are you doing? So, naturally, I went into my BIOS, I disabled Secure Boot and all that sort of stuff, and then I booted into Windows, and it worked perfectly fine. No issues. Well, there was a little brief moment where Windows kind of threw a fit and said, you need to enter your password, but you don't have a password. And so we're going to allow you to reset your password. And so I reset my password, and then I was able to get into Windows fine, and that only happened once. But aside of that, there was not a single issue with me booting into Windows. It just worked. So yeah, this confirms it. You can completely disable Secure Boot, and Windows still works fine.
Okay. This isn't working. That's what I get for working at Microsoft.
As much as I was mildly frustrated with Windows itself, because why would you do that? Like, you clearly don't need me to use Secure Boot, so why would you push it onto me so hard to where I thought you needed me to use Secure Boot? As much as I was frustrated about that, I didn't really care too much because this eased a lot of weight off my shoulders because I knew that no matter what, I would be able to dual boot across Windows and Linux without an issue. So once I figured that out, waited a couple more days, and then finally, the drive shipped. And here it is. This is the drive I would end up using with Linux. Now, once I had the drive, I basically had to put it aside and start thinking about how I would actually go about installing, well, the installation media. This is going to sound really weird because a lot of people don't really have to do this nowadays unless they're using Linux, but basically when you're installing an operating system the traditional way, you usually have to have a dedicated boot device that just exists for the sake of installing said operating system. You do have to do this with Windows in a lot of cases too, but it's kind of obsolete because most Windows computers just kind of come with Windows out of the box. Even if you get, like, a custom PC, a lot of them just come with Windows out of the box. But yeah, usually what you'd have to do is you'd have to take a USB and turn it into a boot drive so that way you could install whatever operating system you're installing. The problem is, I didn't have a USB on hand. Now, I had two methods that I could try. The first we'll get into later because it ended up being the one I went with, but I wasn't totally sure if this method would work, so I wanted to avoid it. The second method, I happened to have a small hard drive on hand that I knew was big enough to do it. This hard drive, however, ended up being a massive pain in the ass, because, yeah, little did I know this fucking drive would just be the devil. My plan was to take this drive and install the installation media onto it, and then just install Linux. That way I could just plug it in, and then unplug it. The problem is, this is what happened when I had it plugged into my computer. And for reference, I should probably mention, Windows runs fine when I don't have this drive plugged in. So everything you're about to see only happens if this hard drive is plugged in.
Okay, so just to give you an idea, I plugged the small hard drive into my computer, and, like, now it's taking forever to boot. Like, my keyboard and mouse aren't even lighting up because the BIOS just isn't doing anything right now. But I know from last time that if I sit here long enough, it will boot. This isn't good because this could mean that, I can't use this drive. So I don't know what to do. Okay, so now it's saying, scanning and repairing drive. It's doing something with the hard drive, I guess. I might have to do my backup plan, which I'm a little nervous about, but I think it's gonna come to that.
So, you know, what I had here was a drive that bottlenecked my computer so bad that I couldn't even open File Explorer, let alone even consider turning it into installation media. So this was dead. This hard drive is fucking terrible. So then, we had to consider option 2.
Okay, so I really didn't want to have to do this, but time for my backup plan, which I'm not even totally sure if this will work, but here it is. Yeah.
For obvious reasons, I wasn't 100% sure if this would even work, because I didn't know if SD cards could be used as installation media. Luckily, though, it did end up working. So I installed a program that exists purely to flash installation media onto USBs, and I flashed the Manjaro installer on it, and it worked perfectly. So now I had a Manjaro installation media. The next thing I had to do was install my new NVMe drive into my computer. And this is where I found out that my computer was missing a screw. It had this screw, and I thought this was the screw that I needed, so I took it out of my motherboard, hooked up the drive, and then screwed this over it, and then I noticed, it's kind of bending the drive in a weird way. I don't really think that's normal, so I immediately took it out out of fear of breaking it, Googled it, and found a Reddit post where someone compared what I had just done to bending pins on a CPU. That sounds, unfortunately, kind of right, because this definitely was not right, and, yeah, I dodged a bullet because, spoiler, the drive still works and it didn't damage anything, but that was kind of terrifying. What you're supposed to do is install the drive and lean it on top of this screw while it's already in the motherboard, and then screw another screw on top of that screw so that the NVMe drive is sort of sandwiched between the two screws. However, I was missing the other screw. Luckily, again, that fucking legend of a friend all the way back from high school that let me try his SATA SSD, he just happened to have these exact screws that I needed laying around, so I called him over Discord, asked him to bring it over, and he did. Fucking legend. I don't know anyone else that would drive to your house to give you a fucking screw on short notice, but this guy did, and I really appreciate him for it.
Okay, so I've got it installed here, and I'm pretty happy because it didn't really end up being that hard. Except this tiny screw, this thing is horrifically small. So small, in fact, that I dropped it, and it was terrifying. You'll notice I don't have the GPU plugged into my PC right now. That's because when I dropped it while trying to screw it in, it ended up in my GPU, so I had to shake it out. But, I got it. It's in. So now I just gotta hook up my GPU again.
So, I installed the drive, screwed it in place, and everything worked fine. I then went ahead and unplugged the hard drive that I store my showcases on, and the SATA SSD that Windows was installed on. I unplugged these mainly so that when I installed Linux, there wouldn't be any chance of me accidentally overwriting the wrong drive and losing data. Just generally felt like a smart move. So I did that, and then I plugged in the NVMe drive, and I booted into the USB. And from there, the installation went pretty simple.
Alright, so it should be booting. Yeah, there we go! Okay. So, I don't really know which of these four I should do. Oh, that's right, there's a fucking timer, isn't there? I always forget about that. So do I do proprietary or open source? I guess I would do open source. Okay, so after looking into it, I'm going to go with proprietary. Alrighty, proprietary. Welcome to Manjaro Linux. Let's go. That's a lot of info. Oh, it's on both monitors. That never happened with Windows. Yeah, there it is. Holy shit, the second monitor's got this little design. That's cool. Okay. So. I'm covering up the password here, but I've got my info all typed in. This PC will be known as Scary OS Deluxe. Oh, those make changes to your disk in order to install. You will not be able to undo the changes. Install now. Alright, I'll stop recording while this finishes. Alright, it says all done. Manjaro Linux 24.2.1 Yonda has been installed on your computer. You may now restart into your new system or continue using the Manjaro Linux live environment. So, I'm gonna have to get used to this for sure. But for now, let me shut down the PC. Alright. So this should mean if I unplug this and I turn the PC back on, yeah, let's go! Alright, now I just gotta figure out how to change that to my primary monitor, but here we are. Welcome to Manjaro, applications, alrighty.
Now, once Linux was installed, I had to start installing programs that I regularly used on Windows. Remember, one of my main goals is to use Windows as little as possible. Ideally, I should only ever have to boot into Windows if I'm syncing music to my iPhone, or if I want to play Call of Duty. That's it. Everything else should be doable on Linux. Now, this is kind of a double-edged sword, because, like I said earlier, if there's a program that doesn't exist on Linux, most likely it won't work. That being said, you can install a program called Wine, which can make some Windows programs work, and ended up being very useful later in this video, but there are some programs like iTunes and Apple Music that are pretty much just completely no-goes, and yeah. But luckily for my use case, everything exists. And the best part, a lot of people have it in their head that if you're on Linux, you pretty much have to be face down in the terminal most of the time. And don't get me wrong, if you know how to use the terminal, it can make it a bit easier. But on Manjaro, they have this package manager where you can just search for programs and install them through it, and it makes things really easy. Like, for example, let's say you want to download Audacity. Well, all you have to do is go over here, go to Add or Remove Software, and you just simply go ahead and type in Audacity. And you wait for it to load for a second. And you click download, apply, type in your thing. Click apply. And it's done. Now if I go over and type in Audacity. Boom, there you go. There's Audacity. It's that easy. There is unfortunately one program that I do regularly use that I couldn't get on Linux. However, honestly, I think I could just do without it and I'd be fine. That program is Stream Elements. Now, Stream Elements is a plugin for OBS, not to be confused with Streamlabs, which sucks ass and also doesn't exist on Linux anyway. Stream Elements, unfortunately, does not exist on Linux. OBS does, and I have that, but Stream Elements, one of my favorite OBS plugins, doesn't, and that's a little bit of a shame. But that's like the only thing I could think of that doesn't exist. Two other notable sacrifices that had to be made. Discord, I use a mod called Vencord, and Vencord does exist on Linux. In fact, Vencord has its own launcher called Vesktop, which is really, really good. Vesktop, unfortunately, does not support keybinds, so I can't mute and deafen while tabbed out of Discord. I have to click the mute and deafen button manually, which is a little annoying, but whatever, I can work with it. If I really need to use my keybinds, I can just use vanilla Discord. Note that if you're playing Geometry Dash and you want to use auto deafen, use vanilla Discord. Auto deafen will not work with Vencord. The other program I couldn't get was Google Chrome. That's the internet browser I've been using for God knows how long, but Firefox works just as well, if not better than Chrome on Windows, if it's used on Linux. I actually think Firefox is amazing on Linux, and I've actually been pretty happy with the switch, even though it's kind of been forced on me because Chrome doesn't exist on Linux, but yeah, I mean, Chrome technically does, but only through its open source variant Chromium, which I didn't want to use. So yeah, Firefox it is. So let's talk about gaming. A lot of people don't understand how simple gaming on Linux actually is. Now, first of all, there are a decent chunk of games, especially games made in-house by Valve, games like the Portal series, that work natively on Linux. But even if it doesn't, a decent chunk of the games that are not supported on Linux are still supported on Linux, especially if you played them through Steam. See, if you go to Steam, and you go to Settings, and you head over down to Compatibility, you can choose to run games through Proton. Enable Steam Play for all other titles. You can use Steam Play to test games in your library that have not been verified with a supported compatibility tool. You can run other titles with Proton Hotfix, Proton 9.0.4. You can select all of these. In rule of thumb, you should probably go with Proton 9.0.4. And when you change this stuff, it might make you restart Steam, that kind of thing. But very simple, you just set that up, Steam is going to boot up, and the moment you do that, a bunch of games that normally wouldn't be supported on Steam are now supported on Steam. So now as Steam boots back up, I can just go in and I can boot up basically whatever game I want, and even if it's not natively supported on Steam, it's supported on Steam. Just as an example, let's boot up Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Trilogy. Now one thing you'll note, and this is actually a good point to mention this, you'll note that games do generally take a little bit longer to boot up than they would on Windows. That is like the only one of 2 downsides I have found when gaming on Linux. Genuinely. Just longer boot times and another issue which I will discuss in a moment. But, as you can see, Ace Attorney running perfectly fine on Linux. And you can play it, it's all here. So one thing to note as well is that some games may have issues running certain compatibility features, and like, this is mainly an issue for modded games, but it can affect vanilla versions of games as well. But basically, sometimes a specific aspect of a game doesn't work properly because some element of the game and or the mod isn't being, like, emulated properly, I guess is the best way to put it. So you might get a game like GD, where, say you want to install Geode and MegaHack, that requires Windows DLLs to work. So for GD specifically, you have to go in and paste this command, otherwise it will not work. Now, the command is different from game to game, and they look similar, but they're different, so, again, all coming back to the golden rule, do your own research. A Google search, it may take a little while, but a Google search will eventually help you figure out how to fix this. And just to give you an idea of how different they can be, this is the one for Balatro. Slightly different, but similar idea. And, you know, once you get that figured out and you have the right command pasted in, mods will work, games will work. Here's a modded Balatro booting up right now. And there it is. Fully playable and everything. Fully playable, and also it's Jen's Almanac, so fully unhinged. One final thing to note before getting into the part of this video that I know everyone's going to be the most interested in, one final thing that I found out about Linux is that Linux files are actually case sensitive. What this means is that if you name a file with a lowercase letter, and then another file with the same name but you make a letter uppercase, those are actually 2 different files and they won't replace each other. This actually kind of matters because I was trying to back up my Borderlands 2 saves from Windows to Linux, and even if I dragged them in, Borderlands 2 didn't recognize them and I couldn't load my character. Simply, this is because on Windows, all of the files started with an uppercase letter. So all I had to do was change them to be lowercase and then paste them in, and it actually worked. I have all my saves now. Just another thing to keep in mind, really. And then there's the elephant in the room. The thing that everyone's going to be curious about, and that's Geometry Dash. It is what my channel is usually focused on, after all. And this is kind of an oddball video for me, making a video about Linux, but this is where I kind of justify it a little bit. I want to talk about playing Geometry Dash on Linux and all of the things that went into making this game work properly. So, GD, out of all of the games I have played, is actually the game that gave me the most trouble getting it to work. Doom 2016 was easier to get working than GD. Not really sure why, to be honest. First and foremost, Proton and Wine handled booting up the game perfectly fine, and there were no issues. However, I wanted to transfer all of my game files and my app data folder from Windows to Linux, specifically so that I didn't have to reset all of my settings, set up all my mods again, all that kind of stuff. I just wanted to paste and be done with it. And this is when I found out that the Steam app data folder is actually kind of hard to find on Linux. So on Windows, what you would normally do is you would go to your root drive. This is my Windows drive, so this is basically the same thing you would do on Windows. You would just simply go to Users, your screen name, you would go to App Data, Local, and then Geometry Dash, and you're there. This is your app data folder. Self-explanatory. You might need to be shown how to do it the first few times, but not bad. On Linux, it's not straightforward, because Proton kinda, and this might be the wrong word to use for this, but it kinda emulates Windows dependencies to allow the game to work, even though I'm not sure if it's emulating it. I think it's just a handler. You get the point. In Linux's case, you have to go to the root of your drive, just like Windows, but then what you have to do is you have to click on Home, your screen name, Steam, Steam again, Steam Apps, and then you go to Compat Data, and you see all of these folders with these different numbers. It's different for each game. Some games are in some, others are in others, and you kind of have to just check each one through trial and error to figure out which one is the one you're looking for. So, like, you'd go into one, you'd click PFX, and then check the drive, and then you'd go to Users, Public, or not Public, you go to Steam User, that's right. And then you would go to App Data and Local and see if it's there. In this case, this one has Doom, which is not what I'm looking for, but that's where Doom's App Data folder is. So if it's not there, you go back and try another. In this case, I know where GD is. It's in this one, because I already found it. But yeah, so once you find the one you're looking for, you go in, Drive C, Users, Steam User, App Data, Local, Geometry Dash, and there is your App Data folder. These are the kind of things that I was talking about when I say do your own research, and Linux is easy, but complicated. This is just an example of something that's simple on Windows, but is kinda hard on Linux, and this kind of thing could end up deterring some people. I assure you, it is worth learning, because these are the kind of things that confuse you the first time, but once you learn these things, you never really have to deal with it again, because you just intuitively know. Luckily, finding the actual game files folder, not the app data one, but like the normal one, is significantly easier, as you don't even really need to use the file manager. You could just do the same thing you do on Windows by just clicking Settings, Manage, and then Browse Local Files, and you're just there, right? And then there's the Resources folder, all that kind of stuff. Very simple, so that's not anywhere near as bad. So then I booted up the game and everything seemed alright until I went into Deadlocked and got to the mini-wave, and then I kind of realized how much input delay there actually was, which obviously isn't a good thing for a precision platformer like Geometry Dash, so I needed to find a fix quick. And this was the first instance of me having to scour Google for a really long time to find a solution. And if any of you are running into this problem, hey, I'll give you what fixed it for me. Keep in mind, though, the same problem can crop up for different reasons for different people, so again, don't treat this video like a guide, but I'll simply tell you what I did to fix it. Basically, according to Reddit, I could fix my problems by downloading 2 repositories. The first one is this one called Game Mode, which I don't know how these fix things, by the way. All I'm gonna say is that I downloaded them and it fixed my issues. So the first one was Game Mode. The second one was a bunch of these things related to Latency Flex. So you had Latency Flex Proton, Latency Flex Bin, and there might have been a third one, but I don't remember. But those are basically the ones. It was just these Latency Flex ones. Latency Flex in Game Mode, once I installed them, removed nearly all of my input delay. After doing that, the game ran mostly fine. However, I did notice that some devices had slightly more input delay than others, Like, normally I can't notice issues with low polling rate devices. Well, I say low, but 1000 Hz is still high, but you get what I mean. Normally I can't notice the difference between 1000 Hz and 8000 Hz, but in this case, I oddly kinda could. Like, my SEO device felt flawless and precise, but my mouse felt off, and no matter how much Googling or what I did, I couldn't seem to fix the issue. And it really felt like it was an issue with Geometry Dash and nothing else, because my keyboard was suffering input delay. And the only issue with that is that I tested Muse Dash, another rhythm-based game, and Muse Dash had no input delay whatsoever. I was able to pass Brainpower on Master difficulty first try on Linux, so I have to assume that it's some issue with GD, whether it be that I'm on the wrong version of Proton for GD, or GD itself is just causing some kind of issue that I'm not aware of. Something was going on. And I found a solution in the most unlikely of places. I decided to start using the Click Between Frames mod. Now hold on, put your pitchforks down. I'm not using CBF the way everyone else uses it, and I am not gaining an unfair advantage like most people do. Let me explain. I'm not using the mod for its intended purpose, and I'm not gaining the unfair advantage that CBF provides. If I head over to the mod really quick, I can show you what I'm effectively doing. Now, if you notice, I have this setting enabled called Click on Steps. This setting basically makes it so that CBF runs the way GD should, rather than the advantage. I don't know how to explain this, but Click Between Frames as a mod effectively allows you to click whenever you want. This setting makes it so that you can only click every 240 steps, which in theory makes it so that the physics and capabilities of the game are identical to vanilla, which means I'm not cheating, I'm not gaining an advantage. What I've effectively done is I've turned Click Between Frames into the Mac exclusive Click On Steps. So that's really all I've done here. I'm not using Click Between Frames in the unfair advantage way. I'm quite literally just using it to make the game constantly pull at 240 ticks per second. This actually ended up fixing literally all of my problems with input delay and game performance. I do have one problem that remains that I do still need to figure out how to fix, but it's unrelated to input issues and all that kind of stuff. The one issue I'm running into is now whenever I play a level, it stutters, but like only if I'm in practice mode, and the stutters only happen after I place a checkpoint, and then they stop if I stop placing checkpoints. So what this means is I'll place a checkpoint, it'll stutter for a few seconds, and then it'll stop. But, like, other than that very specific scenario, I don't get stutters and the game runs fine. So, practice mode is just weird now. That's it. That's weird, the stutters aren't happening. Is it only on object-heavy levels? Well, not object-heavy, but, like, is it only on complicated level? Let me try Fuse Rush, because that's where it was happening before. Did the stutters fix themselves? What do you mean? They're gone! The problem fixed itself. They're gone. So now the game runs even better than I was saying it was when I was recording this, because I was just trying to get footage of the stutters, but now there are no stutters. The game's just working. I'll take it. And yeah, sure enough, other than the practice mode issue, the game is 100% playable, with no issues whatsoever. In fact, just to prove how playable the game actually is, I just got 50% on a level called Formula X. A kind of dog shit level that I'm enjoying, but have no right to be enjoying. This level literally has a frame perfect at the beginning, and I got 50% on it with little to no effort. Okay. Damn. Alright. And at this point, that's really it. You're caught up to speed on everything I've had to deal with Linux. Not that bad, honestly. Like I said, easy but complicated. All you really need to figure out Linux is the capability of doing a Google search, and then doing more Google searches. Using Linux is basically just Google searching. That's what it is. You Google it, and you figure out your problem. There may be a couple things you could run into here and there that could be issues, but for the most part, I don't really run into that many issues. Linux is very user-friendly, especially with the distribution that I chose to go with. Now, don't get me wrong, there are distributions that are not user-friendly, but again, golden rule, do your research. And with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm sure it's a little bit dry, and there are some people that aren't just... they just don't care, you know, they're not going to give a shit, which is fine. Linux is definitely a very nerdy topic, all things considered. And I know some of you might be wondering, that still seems like a lot of effort to get away from Windows. Yeah, it is. But I really don't like Windows, so trust me, it's worth it. And again, I know some people are perfectly fine sticking with Windows, and that's totally fine. I just chose to do this because the main reason, really, is Windows is just really bloated, and I got to a point where GD would lag for literally no reason, and I'd open up Task Manager, and I'd find out, oh, it's because Windows decided to run random background task number 35, and I had to manually kill it, and then I'd check, and Windows would be updating without my permission, and then next thing you know, Windows is scanning for viruses when I didn't ask it to, and you get the point. This is why I chose to switch to Linux, but if you are happy on Windows, that is perfectly understandable. I just, you know, this is something I wanted to do, and that's all it comes down to. And yeah, I hope y'all enjoyed. I apologize if this was a bit of a dry video, but this was just a topic that I really wanted to cover. And with that all being said, I have some unfinished business I need to take care of.